An officer didn't see a war hero. He saw a man alone, quiet and out of place. The kind of man who didn't flinch when spoken to, who didn't offer excuses, and who was used to being mistaken but rarely corrected. Raymond Ellis stood beside Pump 3 at Jackson Stop and Go, filling a silver thermos that still bore the sand scars of Kandahar. He moved slowly, not because he was old, but because the world had taught him that sudden movements could cost more than they were worth. He wore a plain, dark jacket, military boots polished to a dull shine, and a tired look that didn't invite conversation. The cruiser pulled in like it owned the pavement. Not fast, not with sirens blaring, just sure of itself, the way men with small questions act when they think they already have answers. The officer stepped out, younger, broad-chested, with restless fingers, the type who didn't ask twice. "You've been standing here a while, sir?" Raymond looked up, his eyes steady. "Just getting my coffee." The officer's jaw tightened. He glanced at the SUV parked neatly at the curb. Rental plates, black finish, spotless glass. A vehicle that didn't belong to a man like Raymond, at least not in his world. "Got ID?" It wasn't a question. Raymond handed it over. Nothing fake. Just a truth wrapped in layers they wouldn't know how to read. The officer squinted at the card, then tilted it toward the light, as if he was waiting for it to confess something it didn't say. A second cruiser arrived, then a third. No one mentioned a call. No one mentioned a report. Just 3 patrol cars, now watching one man drink lukewarm gas station coffee. "You match a BOLO, the younger one finally said, as if that made official. "A BOLO for what?" Raymond asked, genuinely curious, not mocking. The officer didn't answer. He didn't have to. His partner was already pulling out zip ties. Raymond didn't resist. He didn't raise his voice or wave credentials. He didn't tell them where he'd been that morning or who he was meeting that afternoon. He just said, "You're going to want to be careful with this one." Then he gave a small nod, not to them, but to the camera mounted above the pump, blinking red like a silent witness. They cuffed him anyway. Somewhere off I-40, inside a black SUV slicing through daylight like a scalpel, a federal agent checked his watch. 30 minutes late. Not like Raymond. The agent didn't curse. He didn't call dispatch. He just leaned forward and said, "Roll up, we've got a problem." Because Raymond Ellis wasn't just a name. He was the key, and someone had just slammed the wrong door shut. The cuffs cut deeper than necessary, not from force, but from precision, tight, deliberate, and silent. Raymond had worn gear heavier than this, survived worse. But it wasn't the metal pressing against his wrists that made the moment burn. It was a smugness in the officer's eyes, the look of a man who believed he'd just done something important, something right. They put him in the back of the cruiser, windows half-tinted, the kind that allowed the world to see in just enough to make assumptions. The car smelled like sweat and stale paperwork. The officer didn't speak during the ride. Raymond didn't either. There was nothing to say that would make sense to a man who thought a rental SUV and a calm voice were red flags. The station was small. 3 holding rooms, 6 desks, 1 coffee machine that hadn't worked since the Obama administration. Everyone looked up as they brought him in, not out of concern, but out of routine. A black man in cuffs wasn't new. The silence wasn't shocking. It was boredom. The arresting officer gave a short briefing at the front desk. No charges yet, no warrant, just suspicion and a vague BOLO no one could cite a source for. Raymond was logged as detained for questioning. He was fingerprinted, photographed, and placed in holding room B. It was cold in there, not freezing, just intentional. The walls were the same shade of gray as every other station room in America, designed to feel timeless and inescapable. A flickering light above him hummed faintly like a wasp stuck behind plastic. Raymond sat on the bench, hands still cuffed. He leaned back slightly, letting the chain between his wrists hang just loose enough to hear it click if he moved. He didn't. Behind the glass, they were already watching, not from paranoia, but from protocol. A young officer, a rookie by the looks of it, typed slowly at a computer while sneaking glances into the holding room. "He doesn't seem nervous," he muttered. "Doesn't mean he's clean," another said. "Some of these guys are trained to act calm. Could be ex-military." The rookie frowned. I ran his name. He is Army. Bronze Star. That made the room go quiet. Then why is he here? Because he didn't act scared, the rookie replied, his voice lower now. Outside the station, the black SUVs weren't running lights. They didn't need to. The men inside weren't coming to negotiate. They were coming to recover an asset. Agent Nolan Reeves sat in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle, his eyes locked on the screen of a secure tablet. The signal from Raymond's internal comms had cut off 28 minutes ago. Not lost, manually jammed. That alone was enough to trigger the fail-safe protocol. Reeves wasn't the kind of agent who panicked. He'd served long enough to know that panic never helped a mission. But the moment Raymond's ID pinged as detained, local, unauthorized, something inside him moved. Not fear, calculation. Raymond Ellis was no ordinary contact. He wasn't just a black veteran with a spotless record. He was a high-value undercover informant embedded in a task force probing data breaches, unlawful surveillance, and an underground system that sold sealed records to private buyers. The kind of corruption that didn't wear ski masks or hide in alleys. It wore uniforms, sat at desks, and smiled in briefings. And now Raymond had gone dark in the belly of a small-town precinct known for its spotless arrest numbers and unusually clean books. The car slowed as they approached the last turn before the station. Reeves adjusted his suit jacket, checked his watch, and tapped the driver's shoulder. 2 minutes, he said. No sirens, no noise. We enter under Title 18. They'll know what that means. Back inside holding room B, Raymond remained still. The wall clock ticked louder than it should have. No one had come in to question him yet. No one had read him his rights because, in truth, they didn't know what to ask. They were waiting for something or someone to give them permission to act. Maybe a higher-up, maybe a reason to back down. But it wasn't coming. Not from inside the station, and not fast enough. Raymond shifted slightly on the bench. Then the cuffs jingled just enough to break the rhythm of the silence. He looked up at the camera, stared into the lens, and whispered something the microphone didn't fully catch. But it wasn't for them anyway. It was for the system behind them, for the agency watching their every move through encrypted lines and facial tracking, for the people who knew who he was and what was at stake if they waited too long. Outside, the SUVs had stopped. The first door opened, and the boots began to move. The lobby smelled like floor wax and pride. Officer Reynolds stood at the front desk, still trying to write up the intake report on Raymond Ellis. Except he had nothing solid to write. No warrant, no confirmed match to any active BOLO. Just that same old phrase scribbled in vague ink across too many reports. Fit the description. He didn't know it yet, but that report would never be filed. In the break room, 2 officers joked about the quiet guy in B, assuming he'd end up being some off-the-grid conspiracy nut. Maybe a sovereign citizen. Not dangerous, just annoying. They didn't bother checking his ID again. They didn't notice the silent alarm embedded in the chip. They didn't realize that in D.C., 2 case analysts were already building a timeline of misconduct tied to this very precinct. And Raymond was the thread that connected it all. Outside, the black SUVs didn't idle. They parked with intent. Doors opened in unison. The agent stepped out, not in a rush, but with precision. No shouting, no drawn weapons, just suits, boots, and clipped voices speaking into discreet comms. Agent Nolan Reeves took point. His badge wasn't worn on a lanyard or waved like a threat. It was folded into a leather case with his initials burned deep into the corner. Doge CAD. He didn't knock. He didn't ask. He pushed through the station doors like a man late for a meeting he already owned. The officer at the front desk blinked up from his screen. "Can I help you?" "Yes." Reeves said, calm but firm. "You have someone detained here, Raymond Ellis. I'm here to retrieve him. You with his legal team or something?" Reynolds asked, his voice faltering as he took in the 2 other agents flanking Reeves. Reeves paused, then flipped open the badge. Quick, clean, and final. Federal Criminal Investigations, Title 18, Section 242. Civil rights violations under color law. Reynolds blinked. That was the kind of statute you heard on the news when police departments got sued. Not something you expected to be read to your face by a man with steel in his voice. "We were just questioning him." "On what grounds?" Reynolds froze. In the hallway behind him, another officer appeared, then another. All were suddenly unsure of what this was. None of them understood yet that the floor beneath them had shifted, and no one had felt it. I'm going to need the keys to holding room B. We don't. There's a procedure, Reynolds began. There was Reeves cut in. Now there's me. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Authority, when it's real, doesn't shout. It walks in quietly and rearranges a room. In holding room B, Raymond looked up when the door opened. His eyes met Reeves's for less than a second. No nod, no smile, but it was enough. Recognition without expression. Professional courtesy. Reeves turned to the officer trailing behind. Take those cuffs off. He's not cleared yet. He was cleared before he walked in. You weren't. The room stiffened. The metal clicked. Raymond stood, rubbed his wrists, and adjusted his coat like a man putting armor back on. You cut it close, he said. We were tracking the signal. Reeves replied. They must have blocked it locally. Raymond nodded once. Then we're right. They're covering something. As Reeves escorted Raymond down the hallway, more officers stood by watching, frozen between confusion and dread. Not one of them knew the full story, but they all knew the mood, the storm without thunder, the feeling that the hierarchy had reversed while they were still holding the script. At the lobby doors, Reeves paused and looked back at Reynolds. Whatever report you were writing, delete it. Right now, this station is part of an active federal investigation. Every phone call, every recording, and every key log will be reviewed. If anything's missing, it won't be your badge we ask for. It'll be your freedom. And with that, Raymond Ellis walked out of the station, not because he fought the system, but because he helped build the one that came to clean it. Out in the SUV, he finally exhaled not in relief, but in readiness, because now the real work could begin. Raymond didn't speak for the first 10 minutes of the drive. His hands rested on his knees, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, but his mind was already combing through the details. Faces, tones, hesitations, the camera angle above, holding room B, the flicker in the lights. Something in that station didn't belong, and he knew how to spot rot even when it was polished. Reeves sat beside him, a tablet open on his lap, tracing data lines that danced across a secure map. The signal disruption had come from inside the station's admin network, not from an outside jammer. Someone had manually silenced the uplink. That was climax number 1. They hadn't just cuffed the wrong man. They'd silenced the right one. What's the badge count on that station? Raymond asked. 10 sworn. For civilians, 2 part-time, and a shared dispatch center with the county. Raymond nodded. That's enough to bury a file. And that was the point. Their investigation wasn't about one bad cop. It was about a system that knew how to scrub its own crimes clean. But this time they'd left a print. A single, clumsy digital fingerprint. A break in transmission, time-stamped at the same moment Officer Reynolds forgot to log the ID scan. Reeves tapped into the metadata. That network terminal belongs to Sergeant Marcus Doyle, internal IT supervisor. His login disabled your uplink. Why would a patrol sergeant have clearance for that? Raymond didn't answer. He didn't need to. That was climax number 2. A name, Marcus Doyle. Raymond had heard it before, but in a different context. Not as a cop, but as a former defense contractor with access to tactical comm systems. A man who once worked a private security gig in Iraq and quietly came home with more connections and questions. They pulled off a highway at a rest stop that looked abandoned. One of those mid-state outposts no one used unless they had to. Reeves parked behind a maintenance shed and activated a secured relay. We're pulling satellite from 48 hours. Reeves said, we need to confirm movement around the precinct. Vehicle tags, face matches. Raymond stepped out, took in the silence. Then he said, don't just pull tags. Look for that black Yukon with Texas plates parked across from Pump 3. Reeves frowned. You think it was surveillance? No, Raymond said. I think it was backup. And that was climax number 3. Raymond hadn't just been detained. He'd been intercepted. That Yukon wasn't there by coincidence. It had pulled in just minutes before the officers arrived, sat idling the entire time, then pulled away once he was in cuffs. No driver was visible. No attempt to interfere, just eyes watching. Reeves ran the plate through 2 federal systems. The tag came back expired. Fake. But deeper in the back end, buried in contractor logs, the ID pinged to a former subcontractor with DHS clearance, revoked 3 years ago. Climax number 4. The precinct wasn't operating alone. They were covering for something or someone bigger. Raymond leaned against the SUV, taking a slow breath in. Pull up body cam logs from that day, he said. I want audio, visual, GPS. If any of them didn't activate their cams, that's our next hole. Reeves nodded, already working. 10 minutes later, the data came back. 3 officers on site. Only 1 cam is fully engaged. The arresting officer's camera was manually deactivated 22 seconds after contact. The timestamp matched the moment Raymond said, "You're going to want to be careful with this one." Climax number 5. They shut off on purpose. Raymond's arrest wasn't mistaken identity. It was containment. Someone didn't want him showing up to his scheduled meeting with a DOJ handler. Someone who had access to both local law enforcement and contractor-level intel movement. Reeves turned to him. They tried to erase you. Raymond looked away. Then we pushed louder. Before they left, Raymond opened a secure notebook, a black leather case with 0 connectivity. No GPS, no digital exposure. Inside was a printed list 4 names. None of them were officers. All of them were government employees tied to a contracting group dissolved in 2017, only to reappear under a new LLC shell last fall, headquartered less than 10 miles from the station. Climax number 6. It was a clean shell, a laundering operation using the credibility of law enforcement to collect and sell sealed case data, expunge records, seal juvenile files, and military court documents, all trafficked to private buyers who used the information for illegal surveillance, leverage, or discrimination in housing and employment. Raymond had seen it before. He'd testified about it in a closed session 4 years earlier, but this time, the rot was closer, and they had touched him directly. "Give me the audio line to the DOJ task force," Raymond said. "I'm ready to confirm target escalation." Reeves didn't question it. He flipped the switch, patched him in. Raymond's voice was calm, direct, like a man reciting his own eulogy. "This is Ellis, code for Sierra 1. Mission was compromised at 1042 local. The target location has operational bleed. Station staff are non-isolated. I am escalating under the National Threat Protocol. Prepare to activate internal indictment process." Climax number 7. A sealed federal indictment had just been triggered, the kind that unpacks slowly, feeding names one by one to legal teams already waiting in 4 separate states. Back in the SUV, Raymond pulled up a map. A red glowed over the town they'd just left. But 3 more dots began to flash. Connected precincts that shared case routing software. All of them are under review. All of them had passed arrest reports through the same internal server in the last 72 hours. Climax number 8. It was coordinated. Not just corruption. Infrastructure. The sun was setting, casting a long amber streak across the windshield as the SUV merged back onto the highway. Raymond sat in silence, his eyes scanning the digital map now pulsing with red indicators. Each one a node in a network that wasn't supposed to exist. 3 precincts, 1 server, and a data trail that linked juvenile expungement logs to third-party buyers with no judicial clearance. Climax number 9 was hiding in the plainest place possible, traffic court. Reeves pulled up docket metadata from one of the linked precincts. Every dismissed misdemeanor over the last 6 months had been routed through a shadow review system, one that didn't appear on the official state judicial portal. A software bridge disguised as a printer queue had been scraping sensitive documents and funneling them into a private FTP cloud. IP addresses pinged off relay nodes in Georgia, Arizona, and one final hop, Dubai. Raymond stared at the code on the screen, his jaw tightening. He'd seen this before, not in war. In Washington, he tapped the screen. That protocol ID. Who authorized that? Reeves hesitated, then ran the string through a private DoD authorization tool. The name that popped up wasn't just familiar. It was someone who had sat across from Raymond 3 years ago in a classified committee hearing. Someone who had argued that predictive policing based on behavioral models should be trialed at the municipal level. Climax number 10 hit like a hammer. This wasn't local. This wasn't even a state. This was federal infrastructure being quietly beta tested through corrupted departments, using real citizens as a data feed and real arrests to test reaction time. Raymond sat back. So that's why they grabbed him. Not just because he was an informant, but because he was the last person who could expose the test before the algorithm went national. He turned to Reeves. We're not just dealing with a leak. We're inside a prototype. Reeves said nothing. He didn't have to. His silence was confirmation. At that exact moment, a notification lit up across Reeves' screen. DOJ Internal Review Team requesting field confirmation. The agency had caught up, and now the room was listening. Raymond took the mic again. This is Ellis. Code escalated to Tier 3 federal breach. Evidence confirms the predictive enforcement trial is unauthorized and active. I am invoking Title 18, Section 241 and 242. Conspiracy under color of law. Civil rights deprivation. Recommend immediate lockdown on precinct clusters Delta 7 through Delta 9. The reply came through instantly, flat-toned, final. Confirmed. You're greenlit. Hold position. Raymond locked eyes with Reeves. We need to go back to the station. To all of them. He wasn't just trying to escape anymore. He was hunting. The officer who cuffed him, Reynolds, he wasn't the architect, but he was a gatekeeper. And gatekeepers often know more than they realize. They returned to the town under a sky dipped in early blue. The station, now quiet, still like nothing had ever happened. But something had. The digital forensics team had already been dispatched. Their job was to copy everything, disrupt nothing. But Raymond's job was different. He stepped through the doors, not as a suspect, not as a victim, but as the investigator they never saw coming. Reynolds stood at the back, trying to look busy. He looked up when Raymond entered, then froze. It was the look of a man who realized too late that the power dynamic had flipped completely. Raymond didn't raise his voice. He simply stepped closer and asked one question. Who told you to turn the cameras off? Reynolds opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Raymond waited, then added more slowly. You weren't supposed to even be on duty today. That was true. It was in the logs. The shift change was faked. The normal supervisor was mysteriously called out. Reynolds had covered because someone told him to. Raymond kept going. You got a call that morning, an untraceable line. They told you there was a suspect matching my description near Pump 3. You didn't verify. You didn't ask why a federal-level match came through a local alert system. You just showed up. Reynolds blinked. You're not in control of this anymore, Raymond said. But if you want to be on the right side of the report, now's the only window you'll get. Reynolds hesitated, then said two words that cracked the investigation wide open. Sergeant Doyle. Raymond nodded. The same name from before. The IT supervisor. The former contractor. The man whose clearance should have been revoked, but who had built the very access system being used to scrub identities and test behavioral flagging in real time. Doyle hadn't just silenced Raymond's transmission. He designed the trap, and now Raymond knew exactly where to go next. Reeves stepped in from behind, holding up his phone. We just got a hit. Doyle's badge pinged at the 2nd precinct 30 minutes ago. He's on the move. Raymond didn't smile. He didn't have to. The game had just changed. Not because they found the man behind it, but because the man behind it finally knew someone was coming. The storm was no longer theoretical. It had boots on the ground. And this time, they weren't cuffing the wrong man. They were coming for the right one. They found Doyle exactly where Raymond expected. Not hiding, not running, but teaching. The 2nd precinct looked smaller than the 1st, tucked beside a municipal building with a community outreach banner, still hanging from the summer. But what it lacked in size, it made up for in silence. The kind of silence that comes when everyone inside knows not to ask the wrong questions. Sergeant Marcus Doyle stood behind a podium in the training room, running a session on predictive risk flagging. 5 officers sat in fold-out chairs, nodding along as he walked them through a software demo that tracked behavioral anomalies using heat maps, prior arrest patterns, and GPS data pulled from patrol units. He was selling it like it was the future. He didn't see Raymond walk in. He did, however, freeze when he heard Raymond's voice. Curious how you're training officers on a system that doesn't exist on record. Doyle turned slowly, like a man walking into his own obituary. His smile was too wide. Agent Ellis, I was wondering how long it would take. Raymond didn't smile back. You weren't supposed to be here. This town is badged as tech. None of it should have made it past the third draft review. And yet here you are, rolling out like it's public policy. Doyle motioned for the officers to leave. They didn't move. Raymond continued. You hijacked precinct networks and installed a behavioral surveillance system without federal oversight. You scrubbed sealed records, flagged civilians based on facial heat maps, and instructed officers to act on likelihood, not evidence. Doyle shrugged. It works. It's illegal. It's efficient. Raymond stepped closer. It's a conspiracy under the color of law, and it's over. Doyle looked around, realizing too late that the room was no longer loyal. Two of the officers who had sat listening now stood beside Reeves. One held a recording device, the other a DOJ warrant. Reeves handed it over. Marcus Doyle, under authority of Title 18. You're under arrest for unauthorized access to protected federal data systems, unlawful surveillance, and civil rights violations. You have the right to remain silent. You should use it. Doyle laughed, but it didn't sound like victory. It sounded like disbelief. You think this stops with me? He said. You think I'm the top? No, Raymond replied. You're just the first domino. And that was the real twist. Doyle wasn't the architect. He was a rollout specialist, the beta tester, a man hired not to think but to execute. The blueprint came from higher up, a private analytics firm tied to 3 federal contracts and 4 shell LLCs. Raymond knew the names. He'd seen the invoices buried under consulting fees and predictive performance studies. But Doyle had the proof, and he was arrogant enough to keep it. In his office, through a back hallway they almost missed, was a terminal, offline, air-gapped, protected by biometric access, and a fail-safe designed to wipe on intrusion. But Raymond wasn't there to break it. He was there to watch Doyle do it himself. Open it, Raymond said. You don't have jurisdiction. You already lost that argument. Reeves handed Doyle a tablet. It was live, connected to an agent in D.C. who was watching every keystroke. The second Doyle logged in, a mirror capture cloned the drive. That's when the real data came through. Contracts, time-stamped emails, internal memos referencing target conditioning, risk overlays, and post-arrest data repackaging. It was enough not just for one indictment, but for dozens. That night, Raymond sat in the back of the SUV as they drove toward federal intake. He stared out at the lights flickering past the window, not as a man relieved, but as one remembering what it cost to get here. His name would be buried in the case summary. His role was scrubbed from public record. That was how it worked. But he didn't care because the system that tried to bury him just exposed its own throat. And he'd made sure the right hands had the knife. 3 days later, the news broke, not with sirens or headlines in red font, but with a quiet, unsettling headline that crawled across the bottom of the screen during a Tuesday morning broadcast. DOJ opens probe into predictive policing pilot, multiple arrests in rural departments. They didn't name Raymond. They never would. But those who needed to know already did. Inside federal circles, the case was being quietly nicknamed the dry run. A test gone too far. A tool misused before it was even approved. And one man buried under years of silence who refused to let it slide. Raymond Ellis didn't go back to the town. He didn't speak at any press conferences. He didn't post a video online explaining what had happened. That wasn't his way. He had served in silence once. And now he served again, just in a different kind of uniform. He sat in his apartment that night, lights low, boots off, coffee cooling in the same silver thermos from the gas station. The cuffs were long gone. The bruises on his wrists had faded, but the weight of it all stayed in his chest like a name he wasn't allowed to say. He picked up a letter on the table, a plain envelope with no return address. Inside, a DOJ citation of commendation. Confidential for internal review only. A single line typed at the bottom. Thank you for holding the line. He placed it back down. He didn't need medals. He just needed the system to remember what it promised to be. Outside his window, the city moved like it always had, indifferent, impatient, unaware. But somewhere out there, someone was safer. Someone wouldn't be flagged for walking too calmly or driving a car that looked too expensive. Somewhere, a kid wouldn't grow up with a file built by software that never met him. That was enough. The truth was, Raymond had never wanted to be a symbol. He'd only ever wanted the system to be honest, to say what it meant, to mean what it said. But sometimes the only way to make it tell the truth was to trap it in its own lie. He reached for the remote, paused, then let the silence return. Not the kind they tried to force on him, but the kind he'd earned. The kind that comes when the fight is over, for now, and the right people are watching. Sometimes the loudest form of resistance is a man who refuses to raise his voice because he knows the facts will do the shouting for him. Raymond Ellis didn't carry a protest sign. He didn't have a press team. What he had was a memory sharp enough to trace corruption through its own footprints and the patience to wait for the perfect moment to strike. And when that moment came, he didn't flinch. He moved, because justice doesn't always arrive in headlines or hashtags. Sometimes it wears old boots, keeps receipts, and takes notes on who locked the door when they thought no one would ever knock.